Anybody paying any attention to me? Look at me. Loads of seats up here. Front row. Take the pizza away. Are we recording it? Yes? Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the April meetup for the OWASP Bay Area, in particular the South Bay one. My name is Brandon. If you've never met me before, I see a lot of new faces here. Great to see that. Also great to see some of the old faces. When I joined this chapter in 2014, we had less than 100 people. As of today, we have about 5,500. So I think that's testament to all of you for showing up and all of our hosts and presenters for putting on a show for us. Who's at their first meetup here? First OWASP meetup. Okay, cool. Love that. Welcome. And welcome back if you've been to a few of those before. You've probably seen me and Prashant. Wendy at the back is pretty new. Wendy, are you there? Over here. Hey, Wendy. So if you want to learn a little bit more about OWASP and the chapter, come and talk to me or Wendy or Prashant here. We'll help you out with that. In particular, we need speakers. We need content. We can't put on these meetups unless you put a little bit of yourself out there. And if you've got a conference coming up, you want to try out a new talk, it's a perfect time, perfect opportunity for you. Thank you, JFrog, for hosting. Again, we can't do this without our partners and our sponsors. There's a lot of work goes into organizing a thing like that. It might seem like simple, order a few pizzas and then come up and drink a couple of beers and watch a show, but it takes a lot of work to put these things on. So thank you for that. And also we need new hosts. We love to keep coming back here, but it's not fair if we just keep coming to the same place all the time. One quick note on our, we have a code of conduct. Normally we have a slide. I don't have the slide here tonight. It's really simple. Behave yourself and everyone's going to get on just fine. If you don't behave yourself, like we saw a little while ago on the Zoom meeting, you will be asked to leave. So please don't make us do that. We haven't had to do it yet, thankfully. Tonight we've got two speakers, starting off with Bill Manning from our host JFrog. He's going to talk about demystifying the SBOM impact on secure software development. If you, like I have to deal with in my job, are subject to an executive order that says you have to have a software bill of materials for all of your software, you'll know that this is very topical and a complete pain. And then Abhishek is going to talk to us about resilient posture for cloud native apps. Abhishek is the CEO and co-founder of Virali Networks. And that's what we've got for you tonight. A little bit of housekeeping. Exits are there, bathrooms are there. I'm going to shut up now and I'm going to hand it to our hosts who are going to give us, I think they're going to give something away actually. So if you put a fake email address when you're registered, that's too bad because you're not going to get it.
Yeah, hi. It's really nice to see you all in person for our post-COVID first in-person event in the office. And when we heard about that there is an opportunity to have an in-person event, we jumped at it, and we really were looking forward to seeing all of you. So thank you for signing up and thank you for coming in. A little bit about JFrog, if you did not know, JFrog is a DevOps company. Also, we secure your DevOps pipelines for you. And we have cool t-shirts. So if you're looking for more information, go to our website. A little bit about what I do at JFrog. I'm currently building a Rust platform to secure your supply chain. So if you have more questions, I'll have my email with Brandon or Prashant. If you wanted to ask me questions, feel free to do that. And if you had any overall questions about JFrog, don't hesitate to reach out to us. But thanks for coming in and enjoy the meetup.
I was going to use the other thing, but it's working.
Oh, yeah, we have a cool prize. So scan the QR code or go to the bit.ly link and sign up, and we'll do a raffle, and you will be notified via email. It's a cool tool for the devs. You get a 3D printer if you are the lucky winner.
Hey guys, welcome everybody. Super excited. Let's wait for my share the slide. Hold on. I got it. Wait. Oh, wait. Oh, one more time. Going once, going twice. I feel like I'm raffling stuff off. I feel like I should be doing like like one of those auctions. Everybody got their QR codes? Everybody got their entry? I'd sing to you guys, but that'd be terrible. So. Doing the awkward shuffle up here. Come on. There we go. All right, guys. So we're calling this, demystifying SBOM impact on secure software development, right? It's a mouthful to say, but really what it comes down to, what we're going to discuss today, is software supply chain security and why the software bill of materials became a thing, right? We hear a lot about it these days. We've heard it for the past year. And really what I'm trying to do is just explain some of the methodologies, some of the reasoning behind it, and why we got to this point. And on top of that, really what it is and its impact. Also things like demystifying any sort of things that might be out there that people have misconceptions on. And then also I actually have a couple of examples of both of the qualified formats, SPDX and Cyclone Dx formats. Those are the kind of two qualified formats for software bill of materials. So first, let's kick off with who I am. So I'm Bill Manning. I am the Solution Engineering Manager for New Business in the Americas here at JFrog. I'm also a software, solution architect. I have a very interesting past. Actually, it's funny, as one of the companies that I helped found in the early days. I have a couple of guys right here sitting there. He used to be part of one of my old companies. But my job here is to work with our customer base, do talks like this. And on top of that, many different things. I've been with the company for over 5 years. If I talk too fast, just tell me to slow down. I'm a New Yorker, and this is just the way I talk. So let's get kicked off. So first of all, software supply chain attacks, right? This is where we need to start. We need to understand the justification, the reasonings, the different types of attacks, and how they can affect you and your software development teams. And the thing is that, it's nothing new. It hasn't, really, been around for, a short period of time. It's been around for a long time. But we're going to talk about the events that led up to the reasoning behind it. So first of all, we see headlines like this all the time, right? Especially recently, we've been seeing things like, attacks on an exploit, or, some sort of library has been compromised. Just so you know, we are at JFrog a CNA, and we've recently produced a bunch of CVEs around NPM and other things like that. So we're very heavily invested in this kind of thing. And also too, but as we go through this, hold on, there we go. We hear this all the time. And the thing is that I always make the joke is, and when I talk to our customer base or I talk to other people, is no company wants to be a headline for the wrong reasons, right? There is such a thing as bad press. And finding out that suddenly because of a stupid software supply chain attack, a library that went bad or something in your software, suddenly you're leaking data, customer information, whatever, anything that's susceptible that could have been resolved, right? This is a very normal thing. And then if you look at the history of the things that really brought everything to precedent, we have all the standard stuff. I mean, the big one we'll talk about, of course, is SolarWinds. But the thing is that this has been going on for a long time. And then we started in 2012. But to be honest, it's been going on much longer than that. The thing is, when you think about software supply chain attacks and you think about third-party transit dependencies, which we'll talk about in a bit, I grew up as a developer, since I was a kid. My first job was development, and then I've, done various things over time through the years. But what it comes down to as a developer, we have this inherent naive approach to how we do our jobs. When we look at the libraries we need to perform the functions that we do, the things that we do, we look at the objectivity behind it and say, here's a tool I need to get my job done, to have my KPI, to have, my sprint finished, without thinking about all the pieces that come along with it. We're going to talk about that today. SolarWinds was the big thing that really rocked everybody's world, right? And the only reason why is it was over 18,000 customers, right? 18,000 customers were affected by an issue. And this issue was very interesting. It wasn't heavily sophisticated, but it was pretty sophisticated at the same time. If you're not familiar with the way this actually worked, the issue was a third-party, fourth-level transitive dependency in their product line. It was a library that was brought in with a series of other libraries under the radar. And the best part about this was I actually admire the way this attack was built. And the thing is that it didn't do anything for the first 14 days. So if you use this, they built the software, they distributed it to their customer. The minute that they sparked it up, it set off a timer. 14 days later, it did its nasty bits, right? But the thing is that really what really drew everyone to this is the number of customers, but also the type of customers. Department of Homeland Security, Federal Reserve Bank, right? I mean, you can go on with all the government agencies that use the SolarWinds products for what they do. And this really put a heat on it. I mean, so they were estimating now that it's $100 billion remediation globally for this. That's insane. And that's from a simple library. If you look at the size of the library, by the way, too, it was 1.27 megs. That's it. It was super small. It was under the radar. Nobody knew about it, but it's part of the software supply chain. So when you think about software and you're building it, you got to remember 85 to 90% of your software is someone else's software, right? You have your code and everything else is below it. You depend on these libraries to do your job, to build your products, to get your stuff to market. And like I said, you try to do it as rapidly as possible. And if you're looking for something that's going to concatenate a string, it's going to make a bitmap, whatever you're doing, you just want to find the right tool and get the right job done. When I talk about this software too, and I mean, how many guys and people in here do NPM development? I mean, a couple, right? I call NPM the house party. You invite three libraries to your party, right? That you have implicitly stated, and 500 show up and can wreck the party, right? That's the thing. Is this is the kind of things we're dealing with. And remember, software is everywhere, and automation. And also the big thing is that as we automate more, as we build more faster, more rapidly, we want to get things to market faster, smaller sprints, the deal, get ahead of your competition. All those risks are amplified just because of the fact you want to get it there faster. And you should not compromise security just because you want to get your stuff to market faster. On top of that, the thing is, remember, all your software is not built by your teams, right? I mean, even the transitive dependencies you depend on have other transitive dependencies, and they have transitive dependencies, and they're built by people you will never meet. You will probably never meet in your entire lives. And you're trusting your software with these people. You're looking at these people and you're just like, okay, I don't know you, but I'm going to inherently trust you. And that is a problem. And at the same time, we don't want to remove that approach of building, right? We don't want to ruin that naivety, because that naivety actually makes us better developers, right? We want to build the software we want to build. Also, too, the thing is that one of the problems with all these potential attacks and all these things that are going on is the fact that there's financial, and there's no non-financial rewards, right? It's not traceable. Some are financial, some are not. Some are just I want to show that I did it, right? I mean, the SolarWinds attack to this day, nobody's really sure where it got tracked down to, right? There's no inherent origin. And that's a very typical scenario, but a lot of bragging rights and boards actually do this. 74% of the libraries you use, though, keep this in mind, is they can be repaired by simple remediation. Just by upgrading, by paying attention to the software you're using, looking at the versions, finding out, using tools. There's plenty of security tools out there. I mean, at JFrog, we have our X-ray products, but there's a multitude of tools that are out there. And no matter what you use, it's your responsibility to protect your customers, your users, your company, and your reputation. But the thing is that most of these tools provide some sort of remediation data. and that data that you can utilize to make sure that you're always up to date in addressing the potential issues that could cause problems. And the thing is, I don't have the slide here that I usually would show, but here's the thing is about 80% of the software that you're using, these transitive dependencies you're using, are old, outdated, and haven't been updated in over 4 years. Think about that. In a lot of ways, you're using antiquated technology to build the latest and the hottest. You know, when you think about it, 99% of all software and 85% of it is composed of components, right? There was a 62% increase in exploitation attacks from 2015 to 2021. I know I have a number that's even scarier in a minute because I stopped at 2021 because of the fact that it's growing year over year, right? These inherent potential nastiness is happening more and more every day. The incentives are higher. The actual ease of entry is super easy to do, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the thing is that why is software supply chain attacks so easy, and why is it such a systemic problem with the industry? So number one, it's low effort. It's super low effort. I mean, a lot of these aren't that sophisticated. They don't have to do a lot. You know, the other thing too, it doesn't take a lot of technical knowledge to do what you need to do in this respect. The other thing is too, is if you get in the right technology and you attach these binaries to popular items, like what would happen with SolarWinds, the actual speed in which it can be deployed across the globe is insane. As things get faster and faster, this is one of the inherent problems. And the other thing too is that when this happens, it abuses the trust relationship between you, your corporation, and other entities. And even the thing is I mean, how many companies out there, and maybe in this group, I don't know, but there's a lot of companies out there that have these extreme measures, right? Cut it off, right? Air gapped, or you have to go ahead and request the libraries, and InfoSec has to take a look at it, evaluate the binaries, and then give you the authorization and give it to you, right? There's all these stopgaps that companies are trying to do to try to stop this. And the thing is, it's like walling up a dam where it's not just a pinhole, but it's a gigantic gash, and you're trying to put your whole body in there to stop it. And it's not going to stop. The flow keeps going. But the thing is, though, is they bury themselves in the community. And that's the problem. A lot of these attackers, when they do the things they do, they get the trust of the community behind the packages. They build the software with them. They contribute. They act as active participants to kind of shadow the nefarious causes. And the thing is that you're not sure if they're adding in backdoors or malicious code or things like that, right? That's the thing is that in this idea of communal software, like I know you have the EFF sweatshirt over here, right? And I've contributed to a lot of open source projects, is the more the merrier. It's a community you join. It's a piece of something you feel you're part of. When you contribute, you feel awesome when you see the download counts on the stuff that you've produced, right? You're like, people care. People are using my stuff. But the problem is that there's other people that see that and go, hey, I want to get an exploit done just because I want the kudos of the other side of this, the black hat community, the community that's looking for chaos, right? These agents of chaos are just trying to get susceptible to the community, and they get accepted, and then they do their work. So how do attacks occur? And when we talk about this, you know, I'm a developer developing my code, and I go, okay, here's the tasks I need to do. Here's my KPIs. Like I said, here's my sprints that I need to do. And I go out to the world and I find all the transitive dependencies to do my job better, right? I can use a function to do something, but I need a library for that function. And that library that I call on needs other libraries. But the thing is that if one of these actual libraries has something nefarious inside, and I compile it unbeknownst to me, and I send this to my customer, I've just sent something bad. I've done either if I'm going to share my software, I'm launching a web service, anything like that. Whatever you're doing, whether it's embedded software, doesn't matter. And the thing is that it's usually not a first level transitive dependency. In that case, that is an implicitly stated library I utilize to do my job. Well, the problem is that that library depends on other libraries, that depends on other libraries, and it just keeps going and going and going. So unbeknownst to me, once again, this library that I might brought in might have been fine, but one of the dependencies it has actually will cause the same sort of systemic problem that I'm trying to avoid in the first place. So the thing is in 2021, there was a 650% increase in supply chain attacks. Think about that. You know, the thing is that we were talking before about numbers of like 25%, 40%, very low numbers. 650% increase in supply chain attacks. Pandemic was terrible for boredom. And if you're bored, you might do this, right? So the thing is that, in the increased supply chain attacks, how do you defend yourself? And there are ways, like I said, there's plenty of tools out there. I mean, God, if you're just using GitHub, you have Dependabot, right? I mean, that's one method you could use. Like I said, we have X-Ray, there's Sneak, there's tons of security companies, but we're all heading towards the same goal. And that's software security. Because the thing is that when I talk to my customers about security and it's a product I use, I'm like, hell yeah, I'm going to help you out because you have my data. I'm doing it from a personal perspective. And that's the way you almost have to attach this to is when you take these kind of inherent steps to ensure security, think about you as the customer, right? Your customer is putting trust in you, and you can erode that trust very easily. Trust me, there's a lot of companies out there that have lost trust and faith in their by their user base based on something like this. So when software attacks, right? So this is the kind of various things we have. Things like, if you're a developer, you have things like typo squatting. Yes, there are a group of individuals out there that have actually built nefarious libraries where I before E doesn't exist and E before I does, right? Simple things like that. You mistype something in. Most of the time you won't get something. Occasionally, if you're not paying attention, you will. And that can be also something threatening. There's other ones too, like dependency confusion. These are huge systemic problems. The thing is that there are companies that release software out there for people to use. I mean, think about Netflix, right? I mean, Netflix kind of defined the standards of a lot of different things. I mean, my favorite tool in the world for a long time was Chaos Monkey. Chaos Monkey is just, I don't know, I still love it. I think it's a brilliant piece of software, right? I mean, it's totally destructive in its nature, but it shows resiliency in the stuff that you build. It's awesome. But these are things people put out there. But what about something like this? You're out there and you're like, hey, you know what? I need a library to do the things that I want to do. Hey, look, here's one for analytics. Oh, wait, here's one for authentication. You know what? Hey, it's from PayPal. PayPal is a very secure entity. They're a bank. When you think about what PayPal comes down to, they're a bank. And if you're going to pull from somebody and you want the highest security, you're going to assume PayPal is the best. You know what the problem is? This is an absolute lie. This is not from PayPal. This is not. This is actually somebody putting it out here, and then suddenly you put in your authentication and you're passing all your information and all your identity and stuff off to somewhere unbeknownst to you. Who knows? But this is a very typical attack, right? It's an assumption you've made. They make fake sites. They make, I'm a developer at PayPal, things like that. So that's where software bill of materials became a thing. And the reason why we hear so much about it was these attacks, the increased, and like I said, when you start messing with the US government, yes, there is going to be repercussions, right? And other governments around the world. And the SolarWinds stuff was the fire that ignited the next phase of this. And the reason why it started off with the government, and now it's bleeding into the other sectors, banking, medical, you name it, is now going to have the regulations around things like software bill of materials. So actually, before they even started, by the way, just so you have a little context on how it actually started, is that software bill of materials actually started initially from the Food and Drug Administration, and then part of that is the National Telecommunication and Information Administration, the NTIA. And this was because medical devices. That's the reason why the FDA got involved. And behind this, think about it. You're writing software for things that keep people alive. These are things that can kill people. I actually gave a talk one time that was called If Code Could Kill, and I gave really horrible statistics on how many people died based on software bugs. It was a bad talk. It didn't work out so well. But the idea here is the FDA came along and said, before you release any sort of medical device or any device that's used in human form that could affect somebody's life, you need to know what's in the software. You need to know the pieces behind it. You need to know the information so if something did go wrong, there's liability aspects, there's traceability aspects, the multitude of things you would come to know. Well, in 2021, in May 12th specifically, because of the actual SolarWinds attack, the Biden administration came up with the executive order for improving the nation's cybersecurity. Suddenly, everything became a thing. Right now, suddenly, rules, regulations, you want to do work with the US government, you have to do in these guidelines. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I did read the whole thing, and it took me a while because there was a lot of sleepiness involved because it is a lot of legalese. But for our section, we're going to concentrate on one specific area, and that's Section 4, Enhancing the Software Supply Chain Security. They recognize this as a potential devastating issue that could affect America. And in this case, like I said, this is now also around the world. So it's not just the US. A lot of governments have actually adopted the same mentality. Think about this. Like I said, do you want the DoD, the Department of Defense, to suddenly have a exploitation in the stuff that they do? Like, I don't know, launching nuclear weapons, right? I mean, think about this, right? These are things that are really implicit, but Section 7 actually talks about that any provider of basically software for the government needs to supply the government with a software bill of materials on the contents of the software that they are purchasing. This was immediately adopted by the medical industry next, including hospitals and insurance. This was then taken on by the banks and financial institutions, and now it's growing. So a lot of companies are expecting if you deal with them, they are going to start asking you for a software bill of materials. So what is it? So I don't like talking about software all the time. So basically, since it's the FDA, it's the same thing. What is inside that box of yummy German chocolate delight? And the thing is that it even includes things like warnings, right? May contain wheat and then also may have milk in the ingredients. But the idea here is it's letting you know what's inside, and that's what counts. So let's talk about cake. So we know cake has ingredients. I like correlating software development to cake, and yes, I do like cake. So, of course, you have a bunch of ingredients that you put into this cake, right? But here's something that's interesting. I'm not telling you how to make it. I'm just telling you these are the stuff that you need to put in and by its quantity. So really what it is, it's just a list of ingredients that's inside your software, right? This includes libraries, modules, either they're free, paid, proprietary, doesn't matter. The things with restricted access, you name it, this stuff needs to be in here. Now, the thing is, it's the version and it's the actual library itself. It also can include additional information. It is not required. Tooling, environmental, information, settings, versions, right? Now, these are things that you can add in just to enhance the experience. I'll show in SPDX and Cyclone Dx formats, these are implicitly stated, just so you know. On top of that, the thing is like, what is it used for? It's used for accountability, of course, right? It's used for maintenance. I have one version of the software versus another version of the software. What's changed between them? And we'll discuss that. It also allows people when they go in to do negotiations. So when they're doing any sort of software negotiation, purchasing your software or anything like that, they usually are going to start adding this into either the contract or the evaluation for purchase. We've seen this already with some procurement people. They're actually saying now we need to have this as one of our checkbox items to deal with you as a company before we can issue you a PO. On top of that, it's also for operators, right? So if you're installing a piece of software and that piece of software happens to be, because remember, every company is a software company, no matter what they do, right? The idea here is that this is a way to actually mitigate any sort of inherent risk in bringing that software in by understanding the pieces, components of how it was built. And in some cases too, it also lists things like licensing. Anybody who's dealt with a lot of companies or dealt with any sort of being acquired or anything like that, there's always a thing around licensing, making sure that the licenses that are used in the software you have are compliant to the restrictions, right? Just because it has an open source license doesn't mean it's a valid one, right? There's 435 open source licenses in the world, just so you know. Yes, it is a really crazy number, 435. And you know what? If it's not one of those, why? And also each one of them has their own merits, their own things they do. Of course, if you've ever dealt with it, it's always a pain in the butt. Then, what are the benefits, right? So first of all, identifying, mitigating, and avoiding known vulnerabilities. It's a great thing. The thing is you can parse through this list and take a look at the software components, and it's pretty easy because it comes in a standardized format, especially with Cyclone Dx and also SPDX formats. They're standard formats. There's linters out there where you can actually go through and parse through these to see quickly whether something is there or not. I mean, the thing is that most of the time, most software was black box, and not understanding the components in them can be terrible. Also, too, being able to manage and qualify licenses, right? Identify security and license compliance requirements that actually come with companies, right? Enabling qualification for inherent software, and also a complete comprehensive analysis of how it's actually used, and also maybe even to lowering operating costs. That's a whole nother discussion. I'm not going to dive into it. But it allows you to also go in and just understand that software has a lot of stuff, right? It's just a lot of stuff. Well, let's go back to our cake instead, right? Because there's all different types and pieces. So once again, let's look at this cake, right? This cake is a pretty cake. We know that somebody made it. We know that it was mixed somehow. It was baked in an oven, right? It's probably decorated. Maybe it's not. We're hoping it's tasty. It probably is very tasty. I like chocolate cake. That works. But we know they used ingredients, right? Once again, we know they used ingredients. So when I look at this, the thing is that once again, I know that. But the thing is you can enhance it because you can have so much more. You could include the environmental requirements for this, right? You need an oven. It needs to be at 350. You can, say that, these components were dependent on other components to make this cake, right? The thing is that there's a lot of information that's stored inside this level of detail for each piece of software that you build. Now, what happens if we take a look at one of the ingredients? Let's look at baking soda, right? This is one of the libraries inside of this cake that's used to do it. And suddenly you get the next version of this, and what happens? It's baking powder. That doesn't seem right. Baking soda to baking powder. Now, I am not a great cook, and I have actually made this mistake before. But the thing is that your results are completely different. This is the same level of idea behind actually doing the software itself, right? Knowing what's changed between two versions at a glance. Being able to parse out the differences between two pieces of software also helps in terms of things like remediation. If something has gone bad, if something has gone wrong, is it not performing the way? What's changed between them? And as a software developer and supplier, by supplying this information to the actual customers when they request it, if something goes wrong between them, they have a quick reference point in which they can say, yeah, well, you shipped this, and yeah, it's different. Now, what's inside that counts is really what I mean by this is that let's look at the software example again, right? So I've gone ahead, I've built the software that I have, I pull in my transitive dependencies, I've built the program I'm going to do, and now I can produce a software bill of materials. There we go. It's just, being able to supply this to say, this piece of software I have has the list of all the ingredients that I use to create it. And then when it goes in, I now have accountability. And I can ship this to my customer and they know exactly what they bought, right? It's the same idea. Like I said, you buy any food, you can look at the ingredients at any time. Now, what if something changes between two versions? Well, I can reflect that in the software bill of materials so I know. What if I read the news and suddenly I find something inherently terrible and, as a developer or say a company says, hey, you know what? I read this thing. There's a CVE out there for an exploit that's done with a library that was built in Java, and I think the program we bought was based in Java. Well, I can go ahead and review the software bill of materials and know instantly whether or not the software I have installed in my environment is infected or not with the actual potential threatening component. It's a quick way for remediation. Now, like I said, there's tools out there that do that. We have ours that exposes that, lets you know how far back something is actually been used, right? One of the questions we always get is that root cause analysis and software problems with companies can take days or weeks. With the proper tool set, you can knock it down to minutes and hours, right? If you have the metadata available for you to find the information through a software bill of materials, you can find out if you're affected. If you're a company producing software, you can also use that same level of detail to find out rapidly how far back a possible exploit you've had. So when you look at the software bill of materials and you find something, and you have a software bill of materials for every single version you release, you can check those and find out how far back something has gone. This gives you a chance to get ahead of the situation, to talk to your customers, to come up with a fix, like in this case for 1.4. Now, the thing is that that's just a single piece of software. What about something with a lot of layers, right? I always joke around about this part, but I say, each piece can be different, right? Each one was baked differently. I don't know who made each one of these layers. I don't know. I'm sure it's delicious together. Some things might have baking soda over baking powder. There might be nuts in one, right? This gives me the ability to go and take a look. But if I was to look at a web service, which is made up of multi-different layers, right? You have like the idea of like a Helm chart, which I call the frosting. And then you have the different layers of the cake, which could be the actual pods inside and the containers that are actually running in the actual services below. But what's great is that even when I look at things like even like a runtime, like a Docker container, right? It contains a lot of different stuff. It has an application layer. It has a runtime that runs the application, and then it has a base level OS. I still need to produce software bill of materials because once again, anybody who uses Docker, you bring in a base level image without understanding what's inside. You install the components to run this, and it's the same thing. Like I said, it's all a crapshoot whenever you build your software. Every time you do this and you bring something in, yeah, you might be bringing something in that could be detrimental. But the thing is even when we start talking about web services, right, where you have Helm charts and Docker images, yeah, once again, if something's infected, I want to know inside these software bill of materials for even individual components. Now, the thing is it can include things if you want to include your CI tooling, if you want to, say, when was it built? If you want to have all your stages, like any sort of testing data you might have from your QA team to assure your customers that it went through, say, I don't know, scalability testing, right? What's FOSS, components were used, free and open source software, the old adage, free as in speech, not as in beer. Also like what environment was this thing baked in, right? I mean, the thing is that, you might be CentOS, it might be Debian based, it might be Windows based, it might be built on your Mac, who knows, right? And then also too, are there any security and vulnerabilities that could potentially threaten, right? These are things that you can add in and say, there's an exploit, but it's known that this exploit isn't being used in the software because the function that's actually in question isn't being used. So why should I throw the whole thing out, right? And then you can explain that to your customer so they don't go, hey, you're using this. So some of the misconceptions that we hear a lot from people is, well, number one, is this a roadmap for the attacker? No, once again, I could give you a pile of stuff and tell me, bake me a cake. I don't tell you, if you guys have ever watched the Great British Bake Off, like they have one of the challenges is they give no instructions. They just give a list of ingredients and everybody tries to interpret it best. Same kind of idea. You can try, but you don't have all the level of information. No software disclosure. You do not need to disclose your software source code. If you do, and somebody asks you for that, unless it's illegal and you have like legal documentation in place, no one should ever ask. And then lastly, doesn't it expose my intellectual property? No. It just has pieces. It has parts of stuff that you're using. It doesn't even have to even include your libraries, just so you know. It doesn't have to explain that. It explains all the stuff you use to do your job. So when we walk away from this, right, if you want to work with the US government, you need to have software bill of materials. This has now changed, by the way. This is bled over everywhere. FAA is requiring this, right? A lot of government agencies, of course, but like I said, medical, financial, and others are adopting the standard, right? It's a list of all the FOSS components, paid components, whatever, that you're utilizing for what you do. It provides an audit trail and traceability for anything potentially threatening. It also protects you as an organization. So don't forget that, right? Because it allows you to get ahead of it. It allows you to say, yes, we know there was something bad in there, but we've had it for the past 6 months, but we've addressed it. And you can prove it by giving a software bill of materials to say, yeah, it's been updated. Don't worry, we fixed it. And then the thing is that at the same time, it provides easy, secure, license compliance information. Like I said, if you've ever had to work with your legal teams and try to provide them, whether they go, hey, you know what, we're filing for this. We need you to supply us with a list of all the libraries you're using and all their licenses, right? There's usually a big groan, a sigh, and I'll get to it later. So that's all I've got, and thank you. I will share one thing just so you guys can see. This is what a standard format looks like, just really quick. If you take a look here, you can actually see, oh, sorry, I'm in the middle of doing something. So I'll bring that down. Hold on. So actually, if you look here, this is actually an SPDX format from a software bill of material that I created. It gives you some basic level behind the software. It has the basic inherent list at the top of the modules that I'm actually utilizing. And then from below that, it goes on for a while. Hold on, there's a lot here. Then it goes into the individual components. So you can actually see, like I said, every little piece of software that you produce is parsable and usable. The other format that people are also asking about is Cyclone Dx, right? So these are the two formats that most people utilize. If you look here, you can see inherently it is a different level of format. It has the version, and then it actually breaks things down into their components and interdependencies. So just to let you know, like I said, this is all readily available. It's out there, and definitely I will take a question in a second. But yeah, that's what I've got today. So thank you. Question to the man in blue. Yeah, no, actually, yeah, I was just saying. So the question that was asked was, is that are there companies that take this and put it into other pieces of software, say for accountability? Yes, I know that there's tools out there that companies are using. They're basically cataloging systems. Now this is their software bill of materials and there's format. Now, of course, companies go, hey, you know what? Someone needs to have a catalog for this. And so there are catalog companies that are coming out, but a lot of companies are just taking this and inherently storing it somewhere. It depends on what there's no standard per se. So if there's a startup idea, so yes, Drew. See, I know you by name, so I can actually harass you. Usually you would export it. You would export and store it independently, or you can actually store it wherever you want, right? There's no regulation on where you can store it as long as it's accessible and you can provide it. So if you wanted to, you could always check it in, right? You could always check it into your Git if you were to do it on version, or like for us, like if you're using something like our, here we go, I'm going to mention my company name. We're talking about Artifactory. You could always actually, if you wanted to, publish it as part of the build. You can always upload it as part of it. Yeah, that's probably the way you can do it if you wanted to. It's independent. It is separate. Yes, it is. It's a single SBOM for each piece of product that you produce. Oh. All right. Oh, way in the back. It depends on the size of the project. Oh, these ones here. So they were asking what is like the typical size. To be honest, I'm not really sure. I'd have to go look at the actual look on disk and tell you. But I could find that out. I mean, it's only a couple of K. It's just JSON data. If you look at it, it's basically a reformatted version of JSON data. You know what I mean? So not very big. All right. Oh, one more. Well, it depends, right? So if you look here, if you take a look at this one, like this one here is the Cyclone Dx format, right? And this one doesn't really have the hash. Am I still showing? Oh, I'm not sharing. Hold on. It might help. Sorry. Let me go back to sharing. Where is my? Yeah, it might help if I was actually showing it, right? Yeah. So if you take a look here, you can see where there's really not any hash values, right? And if you look, but it depends. Like some do have it, right? So here's a checksum right here for the individual components. But it's funny though, because some of them don't. Then when you go into if you go into like this side, yes, everyone has a checksum. Well, most software calculates a checksum. It just shows up as a blank, which is if you take a look, it actually shows up as a blank. One more. So the question is, how come some of these libraries aren't pre-certified and other things, right? How do we qualify libraries beforehand? And that's a good question. There are some out there that are qualified that companies will do that, but most of them are independent developers, right? And most independent developers, like they're just going to produce and do. But like companies out there, like I said, there are lots of tools out there that are scanning these vulnerabilities. Like I said, we have ours, so we can look at the potential threats and the vulnerabilities on ingest, right? To make sure that before they even get utilized, that they are safe and secure before they get in. And to be honest, a lot of these exploits don't get figured out further down the line. I mean, look at Log4j, right? Log4j, for how long was this out in the public? And then the thing is that here's the funnier part, by the way, is that before the actual issue happened, there were lots of info and warnings going out saying that this was that there was investigations and nobody paid attention. So, cool. Well, thank you guys. I don't know who's next. Here he comes. And ready? We got the man of the hour. Come on.
Thank you. Hello. Yep.
Hey, we're ready to start. If you guys don't mind settling down again, and we have our next speaker, Abhishek from Arali Networks. I'll hand it over to Abhishek.
So I'll talk about a resilient posture for cloud web apps. The theme is about how do we create self-defending apps even when they are vulnerable? How can they be self-defending and resilient in spite of being vulnerable? So my name is Abhishek Singh. I'm the founder and CEO of Arali Networks. Prior to Arali, I was a co-founder at Titration Analytics acquired by Cisco Systems. I'm also a core member of CSA Zero Trust expert group. And there's my Zoom got disconnected. So is the Zoom still on? Yeah, came back. These are the highlights from a study done by IBM. And the main thing here is that the time to detect breaches is 287 days. It's expensive, obviously, and US is the most attacked country. But the main theme is that no one is safe. Even a person with a single server gets ransomware for 1,500 Bitcoins. They don't always talk about it, but no one is safe. It's not just for big corporations. And this is a real story from a real friend. In the hospitality sector, he had a hotel and he got ransomware for $1,500. He paid for it. Mostly goes unreported. Zoom went again. The Zoom is connecting. Who's projecting here? It's still connecting. So in terms of resiliency, what comes to mind is zero trust. It's a very maligned term that everybody uses. Every vendor uses this term zero trust. So I'm not here to sell zero trust itself, but tell you what zero trust is all about. So zero trust is actually pretty simple. It's about how the President of the United States gets protected by the Secret Service. And there are three questions you need to answer. Who is the president? Where is he at all times? And who has access to him? They don't protect the president by guarding the border of the United States, right? They have very simple questions to answer. And that's, again, my Zoom went away. This is not working out, man. Google Slide. I can add you to my.
Talk amongst yourselves, sir. Technical difficulties.
My email also took some time. When you sent me, It's shared to you already. Yeah, 1 second. I have trying my phone. Yeah, this is on cellular. Yeah, so zero trust is a strategy, and the main thing you need to answer is what are you protecting, and define least privilege policies to protect that resource. Zero trust can be applied to any realm. When applied to VPN, it means zero trust network access. So zero trust can be applied to any resource that you're trying to protect. For VPN, it's ZTNA. For cloud, it's IAM. And for apps is what we are going to talk about, is how do you protect apps with zero trust concepts. This is a NIST definition of zero trust. And by this definition, of perimeter firewall is a valid zero trust device. Prior to the firewall, it's untrusted. After the firewall, it's trusted. But still, a perimeter-based firewall defense is not considered zero trust. And the reason is there's a lot of trust happening between the enforcement point and the resource. And that's a problem. If an intruder is inside, they can access the resource and skip the check. And that's the issue with firewalls being a zero trust device. The other part is policy. Who writes the policy for firewall to make its least privilege? So writing policy has always been a hard part. When people try to practice zero trust, it's all about who gets to write the policy. In terms of what needs to change, we have always relied on perimeter defenses, not just on-prem, but even on cloud. When you talk of VPC, virtual private cloud, you're relying on that being a shell with hard exterior, soft interior. Inside is pretty much open. Even Kubernetes is hard exterior, soft interior. That needs to change. Implied trust within the VPC has to be replaced with continuous verification, time-based trust. You can't authenticate once and then let it access forever, right? You have to authenticate every time. It's a strategic rethink. You have to assume breach. So zero trust means you assume breach and still be resilient to be able to defend against that. It means that you assume that inside your VPC, there is some bad element. The speaker before me was talking about supply chain attacks and SolarWinds. You have to assume there's SolarWinds inside, and can you still be resilient to it? With that in mind, you have to prioritize your security inside out. Every app on its own. So every app becomes self-defending because now the check has moved from perimeter to the app itself. So you're able to create a firewall function close to the app, and that is why it becomes self-defending. You moved zero trust right at the resource. Zero trust, again, is so popular, it has been applied to multiple dimensions. And this being an OWASP meetup, I want to highlight that app is actually the centerpiece. This is a Microsoft slide, and it has 7 pillars for zero trust. Identity, that's your Okta. I put a representative vendor to make it easier to understand what each pillar means, right? So when we talk about endpoints, it's about EDR, XDR, so CrowdStrike, Microsoft sit there. Apps, we have a play there. For network, it's your micro-segmentation. You can use zero trust to segment your networks. And there is some network segmentation from a VPN point of view where Zscaler plays. In terms of infrastructure, you can have zero trust for your VM environments or network. And VMware is a player in that infrastructure space. But again, the point is that it's not so confusing and so complicated. It's actually much easier than that. And this is the main takeaway from this presentation. If you do end-to-end zero trust, the rest of it dissolves. They don't matter as much. What it means is when internet started, all the layers were insecure. And then you had MACsec for layer 2, IPsec for layer 3, SSL for layer 4. But when you have app-to-app security, You don't need the hop by hop. You don't need to secure the wire, secure the air, secure the electrons and protons. You have end to end, and that's what matters. When you have app, it obviates the need for infrastructure, network, and endpoint zero trust. You have end to end, app to app. The middle guys don't matter. If you love your data, you secure your apps. If you really love your data, you won't put your data at your doorstep. You'll encapsulate it. You'll hide it behind an application. And that is why app is a centerpiece, not just for all the other 7 layers, but even for data. You encapsulate it. Don't expose it on the internet. Users are a different beast. They're authenticated very differently. You have MFA for users, but apps have no MFA. So what you use is API secrets, which is basically an euphemism for password. If you're using secrets to authenticate applications, it's very weak. It's as weak as a password. Password gets stolen, they get harvested, they get distributed, they get duplicated. So that's a very bad place for applications to be. Users have upgraded. So the rest of it we can handle as apps. Even though the previous slide was confusing, the essence of it is captured by app. And that is why this OWASP is a good place to think about how to bring zero trust elements to application security. So this is another slide I made, which was Maslow's hierarchy of security needs. It's a triangle. You start with protecting your crown jewels, your precedents, your zero trust, your things that matter. If you do that well, you're good. You can go to sleep, you can have a good night's sleep. The fact is you make mistakes. You have to be defense in depth. You have to assume things will go wrong. And that is why you go after vulnerabilities. You want to make sure that even if I have left some door open, I'm not vulnerable. So you're hunting around vulnerabilities and trying to fix all of them. And that's what AppSec is about. You go around finding vulnerabilities, fixing them. The trick is you can't stop there. In spite of all that effort, it's very overwhelming to fix vulnerabilities. So you have to still assume threats sneak in. So what do you do when threats sneak in? And the traditional controls, current controls, they're doing some machine learning to detect threats. And it's very noisy. It's causing fatigue. In terms of vulnerabilities, that's also causing fatigue. And the reason it causes fatigue is there's so much vulnerability to catch up with. Third-party dependencies, fourth-party. There's so much going on. There's too much noise there. So what we propose is if you do IAM for apps, least privilege, and do it well, it can actually solve all your pillars. If you do IAM for apps, you're protecting your crown jewels with zero trust. If you do your IAM for apps, you don't have to worry about vulnerability. And that's the main part of the presentation. If you actually do IAM for apps, we call it resilient patching. And what that means is your apps might be vulnerable, but they're not exploitable. You don't have to go start chasing vulnerabilities for your apps. You can actually, I'm not suggesting don't patch your apps. You should absolutely patch your apps, but let not every Log4j become a fire drill for you. You have time because your apps are not exploitable. That's the power of zero trust. And if you do it well, you catch threats because in a zero trust environment, threats are locked out by design. They have no privileges. Privileges are assigned to identities, and threats by being foreign elements in your environment, they have no privileges. So it captures all the 3 aspects of cloud security. And it's one place where you can actually get a lot of goodness all over the place. So this is how we are consuming cloud today. It goes from IaaS to PaaS to SaaS. And IaaS, obviously, you're renting the whole VM, running your own Kubernetes clusters. In the PaaS case, you're running Lambdas functions. In the SaaS case, you're consuming APIs. It could be a Salesforce thing, you go on a browser, or it could be S3 SaaS, you're consuming APIs. But the minimum dose is IAM. Even for your SaaS, someone else is writing the application. They patch it, they maintain it. But as a consumer of cloud, you still have to do IAM. And IAM has the language of zero trust. So the buck stops with IAM, even for SaaS, where someone else is writing your app. So what the cloud provider has done, they've given you IAM, and the IAM is protecting cloud provider's resource. So whenever your apps access it, they will give you some passwordless mechanisms to do that. Amazon has a way to do role-based access to their RDS. And that's a great place to be. But what if I have my own database? What if I have a third-party database? The cloud provider does not protect you there. So you have to rely on security groups, network controls. Abstraction drops down. So IAM has a modern abstraction of zero trust, but the moment you steer away from that, it drops down. Instead, if you move the IAM functionality towards the app, where every app has a continuous authorization engine built into it, you get all the links. It doesn't matter it's cloud provider's resource, a third-party resource, your own resource, or a ransomware. You can check all the links consistently. That's the power of bringing your own controls to any cloud. In a consistent way, you can get application security. So going back to the issue of cloud, we are very vulnerable. We are as vulnerable as ever before because there's so many things that can go wrong. With cloud, the scale and pace of cloud, there is configuration problems that can happen. With all the dependency and supply chain attacks, the intruder is already inside. There is no, you can't take solace in that you have perimeter controls or VPC controls. The guy is already sitting inside. And thirdly, you have vulnerable applications. Your web app is vulnerable. Someone can attack and maliciously put their code inside, launch something there, and cause problems. So the theme or the point of the presentation is that we are very vulnerable. But the thinking needs to move beyond vulnerability to exploitability. I can be vulnerable, but let me be resilient. The opposite of vulnerable is resilient. If you're vulnerable, you're weak. So be resilient. How do you be resilient? By making sure, even if you're weak, you don't fall down. Even if you're vulnerable, you don't get exploited. And that's what Zero Trust lets you do. So this is a framework of how you become resilient. And this is also how we have managed COVID as a society. The first step is identify. So you identify the vulnerable population, the diabetic people, the sick people. You go vaccinate them. Step number 2, protect them, vaccinate them. You can't vaccinate everyone. Like Zero Trust, you have to vaccinate the president and the important people. You have test centers for the rest of the population. Once you find them, you quarantine them, release them. This is how we have managed COVID. And that's how we become resilient as a society. But this is how NIST wants you to do cybersecurity. This is NIST's cybersecurity framework. Unfortunate truth is it doesn't work because we have become very reactive. We have become very reactive because this whole detect, respond, recover is a reactive thing. You're not proactively safe. You have not put proactive controls to get to Zero Trust. If it takes 287 days to detect problems, if your COVID test takes 100 days to come back, you're either dead or you don't care. And that is why this cycle doesn't work. It's a great resilience cycle, doesn't work. If you go back to identify and protect, even that is reactive. You're patching vulnerabilities. Your identify is reactive. When someone discloses a vulnerability, you go and patch it. What happened between disclosure and patching? There are 60 days, according to SNCC, to patch a single thing. You might be faster, 6 weeks, 6 hours, six minutes. What happened in those 6 minutes? Was I breached? Or something happened? So that level of continuous authorization is still missing in this reactive approach. And this can be changed by taking a more proactive stance to application security. What we say here is you have a continuous authorization engine alongside your application. So once your apps are protected, so identify, so again, you can't lock everything down, but you can have this continuous authorization running in monitoring mode for every application. And continuously, it is guarding what every app does. So you're proactive. When SolarWinds happened, I didn't have a signature for it. When Log4j happened, I didn't have a signature for it. It would still respond in real time because I would see a new activity, which I've never seen before. So it cuts the noise out of threats. It cuts the thing about policy and gives you a clean picture here. And that's how we become proactively resilient. We don't take 100 days to detect some problems. It's happening in real time. Continuously, every activity is being authorized. This is how we traditionally handle application vulnerabilities. And I'm calling it physical patching. It takes time. You have to recompile, you have to retest, you have to make sure nothing is broken. Sometimes you can't even patch. It's not compatible. The compatible patch is not available. So patching is not always an option. So people have known about it. And they have proposed virtual patching as a solution. So the OWASP Foundation has a big page on virtual patching. And it says this is a legitimate way to make sure you have some compensating controls for the time it takes to patch. The problem with that is also very reactive in nature. So the virtual patching is doing content filtering. That's a technology use. You need to get signatures from somewhere to do that virtual patch. So there's still a gap between your cup and the lip. What happened between that time? You don't know. It's blacklist based. So every time some bad thing happens, you get a signature. And that signature can have problems. The malware can do polymorphic transformations to beat that signature. So you're not always protected. But with IAM for apps, it's signature free. It's proactive. I don't care what the vulnerability was. If it does new activity, if it goes to some foreign state, I will capture it. I will capture every activity for every app. IAM, identity-based access. If any access is made, it gets logged. And that logging makes a big difference. So it's not just gets logged, it can be enforced. And when you enforce that, it'll never go outside. It might be vulnerable. Some foreign nation might have planted some code in your supply chain. It'll never go out. It'll get blocked because you have proactively enforced it. And that is why if you resilient patch your stuff, your apps are not exploitable. They won't talk to strangers because I have a firewall at the edge that evaluates every access. It won't talk outside. It won't have any backdoor problems because I don't let it go outside. It can't misbehave under the influence of an attacker. So that's the power of resilient patching. It is proactive versus virtual patching, which still has to wait for a signature. Those signatures can be changed. In this case, it's proactive. You're done. Once you put this technology in place, you'll never miss anything forever. So identity has been a key driver of how we have made progress. And like I said, for users, we have gone past VPNs. We are doing ZTNA today. We have gone past password. We are doing MFA today. Unfortunately, the digital identities are still living in dark worlds of passwords. So there was an attempt made by the networking industry and network microsegmentation in the name of zero trust to make it least privileged, make sure you can contain a threat, right? It didn't work very well because your identities were network-based. If you have layer 3, layer 7 identities, they keep churning in cloud. They keep changing. Your policy keeps changing. And that is why it leads to a lot of alert fatigue, a lot of problems. It is not stabilizing for you. It's not giving you value. What we propose in IAM for apps is identity focus. If you give every app continuous identity, it doesn't change. It's stable. You can discover in dev, use in prod. It doesn't change on every deployment. And that solves your policy churn. That solves your alert churn. Now alerts are not churning because things have stabilized. And that is the power of IAM for apps and identity focus, which is taking away from networking and giving you true IAM for applications. So this kind of resilient patching also gives you defense in depth. So old style web apps were monolithic, modern apps are more microservice based. So one big fat app has become 20 microservices. If one microservice gets compromised, it doesn't put everyone else at risk. It creates a natural defense in depth because to hop one microservice, it'll get locked down. The intruder gets locked at source. It doesn't have an ability to move beyond the first microservice. That is why it's restoring defense in depth. In today's modern Kubernetes cloud world, it's a flat network. Inside a VPC, it's flat. Everyone sees everyone. Inside Kubernetes, every pod can see every other pod. So one pod gets compromised, every other pod is at risk. With this style of resilient patching, every app can be patched. Every app becomes a boundary that needs to be crossed. And that is bringing back defense in depth. Your data is tucked away. You still have to jump through 7 hoops to get to your data. And that is lost in this cloud world. We used to have this 3-tier architecture in old school. It's gone. It's lost now. So we talked about resilient patching and zero trust, but it still doesn't come together as to how something like resilient patching would help not make an app exploitable. So we took a real example here. The example is of Log4j, I think. Yeah, So you might have heard of Log4j, but with this continuous authorization, continuous verification, you see a very different view of how Log4j looks like. Yeah, please. I think the audio is not coming out properly. I'll walk you when it happens. So Log4j is very scary. No, so
Also a dark bomb here depicting that container and the process have vulnerability. Clicking on the container vulnerability, I can see Log4j vulnerability there.
so then can you replay it from beginning?
If I change the view to application,
And it's restarted.
in the last video we saw how CVE 44228, also known as Log4j, can be easily exploited to gain a foothold into any environment. Pretty scary. Now we will take a look into how the concept of resilient patching can be applied to prevent this class of attack.
So Log4j is pretty scary. In the bottom right machine, any machine with the curl command can hit any Java process and get a backdoor on it. The top right thing is a Java screen. The bottom right is an attacker machine. What we're doing here is hosting a malicious LDAP server. So the Java guy will go to the LDAP server, download some bad code, and establish a backdoor to the left-hand side, right? And gets a shell over there. So we showed the attack in a previous video. Here we are showing mitigation. And we are showing how the attack looked like.
Now coming back to the Arali UI. This is how the app looks like in normal operations. An ingress coming in to each of the Java and SSHD process and no egress connection. There is also a dark bomb here depicting that container and the process have vulnerability. Clicking on the container vulnerability, I can see log4j vulnerability there.
So this is what we are tracing in terms of identity and access without enforcing anything. So it will let the attack go through and tell you exactly how it happened.
If I change the view to application plane, I can get a stable view of what happened. Here I see my personal laptop IP connecting to the front end and then a connection going to LDAP. After that, you can see a connection going to GitHub to download SOCAT, which will be used to execute the reverse shell. Since these are unexpected behavior for the app, they get flagged as red lines or alert. If I go to the alert page, I can see a list of alerts which are sent to the SecOps team. Now coming to remediation. Unlike other tools, Arali can remediate your vulnerable processes via resilient patching. I can select the right connection for the container and turn on resilient patching on the vulnerable app. In this case, only ingress is allowed and no egress, which means that the connection to the LDAP server is effectively locked out. Let's go back to the terminal and rerun the command. This time I get nothing, no response. There is not much I can do as an attacker. With Arali, you can both detect as well as remediate log4j class of vulnerabilities till your team upgrades all your impacted application. If this sounds interesting, go to aralinetworks.com for a free
The main theme here was it was signatureless. There was no signature needed to detect log4j. You're still vulnerable. So you're still vulnerable to some attack coming in through a curl command, but you're not exploitable. It could not go out to a malicious LDAP server or create a backdoor. So in spite of having no signatures, you were proactively protected. You're not exploitable. That was the theme of this. And again, a lot of people do scanning and tell you have log4j. Very few people give you mitigation against it. And Zero Trust has that power. It has the power to hold things to least privileges and without signatures, prevent bad things from happening. So you're vulnerable, but still not exploitable. And the beauty of the platform is it's very easy to install. So once you've installed Arali on your Kubernetes cluster, it automatically detects all these behaviors. It's ready to apply the patch. Patch is already pre-discovered for you. So if you had to write this policy by hand, it's hard. The benefit is Zero Trust is good. No one uses it. And no one uses it because it's too hard to write these policies. The power is in the discovery. It's pre-discovered for you. You apply a patch, you're protected for life. So when there is XDR platforms, you detect something, you respond. This is patch once, prevent forever. Once you have patched something, you can take your time. Again, I'm not suggesting don't patch your applications. You should absolutely do that. Let not every of those things become a fire drill. And that's what the power of resiliency is. So when people think about making their web apps or applications resilient, Zero Trust is a tool that is coming from infrastructure into the hands of application developers. Now they have the power to publish policy as code. So this is my Zero Trust policy. This is what my app does. And you can publish it as code and your app and policies go together. So app is becoming the center of activity in the world forward. And even SecOps is going to be an app function. Even policy is going to be an app function. Traditionally, these kind of controls have lived in infrastructure. We are trying to make it app-centric. So now app SecOps, you're seeing what your app does, what your supply chain does. Even if you have multiple levels of supply chain, it's your responsibility running in your premise. You have to know what it does. We'll give you visibility in what your app does. If someone is hiding code in your app, you will know. You will never live in the blind. Proactively, always, never miss anything. And that's the power of this style of thinking. It's a tool to start making your apps resilient and sleep well at night without move this stuff. Hello. Yeah, so apologies, it was not the smooth presentation. Yes, we had a discussion when we started, and I said, I'm talking zero trust. And the question was, is it VPN? This is nothing to do with VPN, it's all about apps. So how do you incorporate zero trust principles in the way we write apps? The main theme is policy as code. You can create zero trust policy as code for your apps. Even though your apps have transitive dependencies, you can control what they do, and you can take charge of what they do. Yes. So if you think about ransomware, yeah, the question was, what do we mean by apps? So when we talk about ransomware and malware, they're not users. It's malicious code. It's sitting in your premise. It's not a user. So there are two elements in this presentation, right? And zero trust is helping both of it. It's making your app self-defending. The firewall function that used to run at the perimeter is running at your app. So if you need to talk to 5 other microservices, that becomes policy. So only authorized entities can talk to your app. Even if you're vulnerable, an intruder cannot talk to you. Even if you're vulnerable, no one can. Your legitimate apps have no incentive to exploit you, right? So it's creating that zero trust for your self-defending app because I have a firewall function sitting next to my app, protecting my app. That's the app aspect of it. A threat is also an app in some ways because it's malicious code. Malware, ransomware is code. It's not a user, it's a code. And that code also needs my permission to do anything. And by definition, it has zero privileges. It's an illegitimate app. If you create good governance for your citizens, it's very easy to find intruders in your environment. So it's a way. So again, there are two ways to find threats. One is by looking for bad behavior. I know that a bad guy wears a black hat and that's a bad behavior, right? But the other way is, I know all my good guys. I've put their face on my camera. Anything that doesn't match these good guys, that's a whitelisted approach. It's bad. And that is why the zero trust for good governance for good apps is also letting you do jailing of bad guys. They are jailed at birth, at source, wherever they are. They can't do anything. They are contained at source. And that's the power of it. Again, it applies to both legitimate apps and illegitimate apps. The illegitimate apps are your threats. And if all the legitimate guys do their job and do their zero trust policies, by definition, the bad guys have no privilege. So just if every developer, if every app had this protection, it locks out the bad guys. Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, I had some mention of XDR and yeah. So I talked about XDR. The question is, do I still need an XDR with this? Or what is the thing, right? So one slide I showed upfront was the Maslow's hierarchy of security needs. It starts with controls, IAM, goes to vulnerability management, and finally threat management. If you do your zero trust, you don't need anything. You're done. But it's not a perfect world, so you have to do vulnerability management. If you don't do vulnerability management well, there will be threats. You have to manage them, right? What is XDR doing? XDR, by some definition, is EDR plus NDR. They have a lot of context for endpoint, a lot of context from network, marry them together, becomes XDR. So what they're doing is throwing all those metrics or telemetry into a security data lake and then churning it to give you real-time threat detection, right? What we are doing is, at source, we are stitching endpoint context, identity, and network context, and achieving the same results. So the reason you combine endpoint and network gives you power, because network is visible behavior. If you air gap something, it's safe, it's very safe. If you air gap an intruder, you are still safe. So network plus endpoint context gives you that magic. And yes, you can eliminate XDR. You don't need those guys, they're reactive. How do you deal with what? DDoS. So the question is, how do we deal with DDoS, right? So DDoS is, if a malicious guy is putting a lot of heavy traffic towards you, how do you deal with it? In my view, that protection should come from cloud provider. When Amazon has AWS Guard, absolutely use it. And the reason you want to use it is, if I'm providing that service, you're scaling up, you're paying Amazon for it. If Amazon is doing it for you, They will take care of it, and you not have to scale to defend against DDoS. So that's a function that is not application. You have to contain it in infrastructure at the Amazon layer, because you don't want to scale and then protect against it. Let Amazon do it. They'll not charge you for the scale. If I have to do it, they're getting charged for scaling and being able to handle it. And that is why it does not belong in the app tier. It's an infrastructure thing. Let them handle it there. The infrastructure is pushed down to Amazon, and let them handle it. Yeah, so again, great question. What is happening under the covers and what is novel about it? Let me rephrase it in a way that I will answer your question indirectly. So the abstractions for network security have not changed. It's called ACL in Cisco speak. It's called firewall group. Fundamentally, it's a 5-tuple, or IP tables on Linux, 5-tuple. IP port, IP port. I cannot express these policies in IP tables. I cannot. I would have loved to use IP tables. I have built a purpose-built firewall using eBPF. So eBPF is a modern mechanism that allows you to write just-in-time kernel code. And using that, you can create fancy abstractions. So we have created a firewall-like abstraction with the grammar of zero trust, identity, and privileges. You cannot even express a DNS-based policy in a firewall. In a traditional Linux IP tables, you cannot say, I can't talk to google.com. You have to convert it to IP and port 5-tuple. That's all the abstraction gives you. What giving you is a much nicer abstraction, identity abstraction. And at eBPF layer, I'm not tracking the network. I'm tracking the syscalls, who's doing connect, who's doing accept. Under the covers, that's what I'm doing. I'm tracing who's doing connect and accept, which identity, workload identity, which process, and then saying who can talk to whom. There's nothing networking about it. This process can talk to that process. Let the network IP be whatever it is. But to get you the enforcement, I do use networking. So I air gap the bad guy. And that air gapping is through network controls. I could have chosen to kill the process, but I'm not doing it because network is known to be a good way to quarantine stuff. I'm doing a network quarantine, but my policy is identity level. It's not network level. I'm not doing 5-tuple at all. I'm doing which process can talk to what process. It's a totally different paradigm. Does not exist. We have built it from scratch, from the ground up, every layer of it. I'm not using any IP tables to implement this. In fact, my policies are inexpressible in IP tables. Again, yes, I'm an agent, but my agent is a control plane entity that installs an eBPF program. My data plane sits in the Linux kernel. It's performance efficient. There's no punting of packets into a sidecar. None of that is going on. Yes, it's an agent from a programming perspective, control plane perspective, but it's not an agent from a data path perspective. The data path is in kernel, performant, efficient, low overhead, all of that. I personally did not want to make it a rally pitch. It was more about trying to infuse some zero trust ideas into how we think about app development, right? So far we have been chasing vulnerabilities. It's a never ending battle. People think I will be resilient when I've covered my bases. Fact is, you'll never cover your bases. You'll never become 100% non-vulnerable. So you have to think upfront. So this whole COVID problem, right? If I say, I'll do detection after I've covered everyone, right? That's a bad practice. You need resiliency when you're most vulnerable. You need detect response most vulnerable. You have to think upfront. So I'm trying to infuse the thinking that zero trust is something to think about. And don't try just spend time chasing vulnerabilities. I did not go into my solution because that was not an object of presentation. Yeah, so IAM is something that cloud providers created, and they were very forward thinking in their approach. Amazon by default is deny unless you create an explicit policy. So what is zero trust? Explicit policies, default deny. That's cloud. That's how cloud operates. If you don't have a rule to come in, it's blacked out by default. So they gave you IAM, but writing policy was the hard part. Now you have to go and write. It's a mess. It's a PhD to write IAM policies. This is very different. You just install the software. It learns. It tells you this is your policy. Do you accept it? You're approving policies. There is no policy to write. But still people want their source of truth to be in Git, because Git is a developer favored tool for version control, all those things, right? So we allow our policies to be downloaded as YAML. You don't have to write it. We'll write it for you. Download it, put it in Git, go through Git review, immutable policy as code. So now these zero trust policies sit with code. Someone was asking, how does the SBOM travel, right? This literally travels with code in your Git. When the code gets deployed, this policy gets orchestrated. So it comes with your code, with your app. It's kind of an app buddy in a lot of ways, right? The policy is downloadable. You can put it in Git, go through Git review. Yeah. And the difference is in the IAM world, the policy writing was new, still very complicated. I come with batteries included. Policies are given to you. Yeah, beautiful question. So this is, you still have IAM to define your roles, right? And you say, I created a service account, and the service account allows me to access DynamoDB. And you can use a service account from Google. The problem is service account is nothing but a password. It gets into GitHub, it gets stolen. Now you're converting an access management problem to a secret management problem. With Arali kind of technology, you can take your IAM to any cloud, and I will federate identity across clouds for you. Because these identities I manage independent of cloud. You still have to do IAM, but put your passwords on the internet because they won't matter anymore. That IAM only defines that if my app has access to this S3 better belong to my organization. There's nothing secret about it. I'm defining a resource in my Amazon AWS or Google, whatever they call it. And that is defining that my resource has this description, this org, this bucket. But the policy of who gets to access is passwordless because I don't let anyone go, even if they have a password. So an intruder in, let's take another example for IAM. So IAM, you have given a role to your VM, to your Lambda. So this is a very classic Lambda problem, I'll tell you. You've given that role to your VM. Your app gets compromised. An intruder is on that box. He gets the same role. And that's a problem with network-based controls. Anyone that assumes that same IP address writes on it. He gets the same privilege. Not with this technology, because you're actually doing notarization of app identity and then giving privileges based on that. On the Lambda, I know some background here, so I'll pose a question on his behalf and answer it also. Sorry, Puneet. So Lambda, I have a problem with Salesforce, right? So Salesforce is saying, hey, I have a friend, he said, we run in Salesforce, they have hired FBI guys, so very safe, I don't worry about security. And I said, is your app vulnerable? Can it be exploited? And yes. And if it gets exploited, can someone launch a process, launch a backdoor? How do you detect it? I don't know. So these cloud providers have made it a shared responsibility. What they're indirectly telling you is your apps better be not vulnerable. If you're vulnerable, you're on your own, shared responsibility, not my problem. Salesforce doesn't care. They're multi-tenant. So your tenant is compromised and an attacker in your Lambda can do whatever they want without you doing anything. But they've taken a foothold there and their other tenants are not affected. Salesforce is not affected, but you as a customer are affected. So you're running in untrusted environments. How do you solve that problem? So we have some ideas on it. We have not solved Lambdas. It's a tricky problem because in the name of sharing and caring, it's a no man's land. And that guy doesn't care because it's multi-tenant, his other tenants are not affected, he's not affected, but you are affected. You're running code in somebody else's environment where they have not given you proper controls. And they're asking you to do shared responsibility, write perfect code.
Thank you for coming. Sorry for the network issues. We have some work to do on our internet. But thank you for coming and allowing us to host. Yeah.